This is some of them. Quite frankly, I was in no position to get a mortgage, and nor was I in any position to make an offer on farmland.
Today and Across the Fence, the challenges, the opportunities, and the importance of finding ways for young farmers to purchase land and start agricultural businesses without breaking the bank. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. One of the critical issues for the future of agriculture in Vermont and elsewhere is family farm succession or farm transfer. For many young or new farmers, farmland is unaffordable. That's where University of Vermont Extension comes in. Extension provides support to those new farmers as well as to retiring farmers who need help navigating the complex farm succession process. Across the Fence's Keith Silva tells us more.
Keith Morris owns Willow Crossing Farm in Jeffersonville.
Horticulture comes from hortus, which means that those things are inside your fence or inside your wall. And then
over 300 species of plants grow on this 30-acre farm. Everything from fruit and nut trees to vegetables and herbs. Morris farms using a practice called permaculture. It's a systems approach to farming, a kind of ecological engineering that promotes sustainability for both the farmer and the environment.
This is the leaf scar on the butternut. Oh, we jokingly call it the monkey face.
Like every farmer, Morris sees things on his farm that the casual viewer might miss. What for some seems like a garden variety vegetable and berry operation looks to Morris like a dream come true.
I was 22 years old at the time I started looking for farmland, and quite frankly, I was in no position to get a mortgage, and nor was I in any position to make an offer on farmland, and started shopping primarily to educate myself in terms of relative values and get a sense of what was out there and what it was worth and how the process of acquiring farmland worked.
In the course of his visits to various properties, Morris came across this location in the Lamoille Valley. Not too long after, he hit on an idea of how to turn this old hayfield into his own farm.
I started looking at, what I was spending per month for renting an apartment, and looking at what that might get me in terms of farmland was a lot more than many farmers would pay for rent for things like haying, for instance, which was all this farm was used for at the time. And proposed a rent-to-own arrangement where I was paying a little bit more than you would normally pay for regular agricultural land lease, with an eye towards buying it in the end of a relatively short-term lease. I love it. I'm planting hundreds of them because I want to see more of them.
Red clover blossoms to rose hips.
Kori, Gelinus, Morris's partner in life and in business, makes teas, tinctures, and oils from herbs she grows on the farm. Gelinus shares her partner's dream of farming. It's a goal that keeps her grounded and yet open to thinking outside the box.
My first 2 years on this farm was not easy. It's a lot of work and very challenging and very frustrating, where you're crying and you're exhausted, and especially with children or a child at the point on the farm. It wasn't fun all the time, but it was very rewarding. For years prior to that, though, I was dreaming this up. I was writing business plans. I was trying to figure out. I did all of the prep work on paper in my mind and at school, and trying to figure out where this place is going to be. We have properties and we have a farm and we have all these things, and none of it has been through working with banks and finding the traditional route. We just aren't traditional people, and that hasn't stopped us from getting our dreams accomplished,
As you would like to.
Yeah.
Bob Parsons is an agricultural economist with University of Vermont Extension.
Most young farmers have several things. They have lots of initiative, they have lots of ideas, and they have no money.
Parsons sees the lease-to-own approach as one of the less risky ways to go about owning a farm.
One, it provides the young farmer assurance that this property will be theirs someday. Two, they can go about making the long-term improvements that they would like to make in this land, whether it plants multi-year crops or making a building, or you need a shop, you need a residence, you need a sales unit on the farm. And 3, it is a long-term agreement, but it allows the farmer to know that they're going to be able to purchase this without coming up with the large down payment that is required for most land purchases, where you need maybe like 10 or 20% cash to lay down.
Berries, sugar bush trees.
A lease-to-own option does favor young farmers, but Parsons also believes that this option gives landholders certain guarantees as well.
The landholder, he has probably made an effort that he would like to see a farmer on this land, and so he has a long-term agreement then of how this property will be going over to the young farmer. So some of the key parts of this are, determining how long this thing's going to transpire before it's actually the property is transferred. It includes of what the price the land is going to be, and how to treat this income that is received, that the farmer is paying to the landowner, because this is where it gets into a little bit of complexity that you need to work with an accountant, because is this money that he's paying, is that sale money for the land, or is that rental income for the land? And so both of them need to be working with this, know what the objective is, and lay this out, and working with an accountant so that they all know how exactly this transpires.
After 9 years, Morris and Gelinus now own the property debt-free. This experience has taught them that accountants and lawyers are key to the process, but it's also important to make sure that the buyer and seller share the same vision.
We did have a contract, and quite frankly, I think there's some things that we both learned in this process and that we might have done differently, or possibly could have done better. But we had a written agreement which was as clear as possible. And we had really open communication and conversations about our intentions and what would happen in any variety of worst case scenarios, so that before the fact we had mutual understanding as to what would result.
Even though Morris's experience has been positive, he advises caution and a slow growth approach when it comes to any agricultural business.
Finding land is obviously a significant challenge to starting a farm, and as exciting as things like lease-to-own arrangements are, or other loans and incentives that help get young farmers on land, I think many beginning farmers and young farmers might do best to start developing their enterprises and their expertise even before acquiring land, or especially before undertaking a significant amount of debt. If you can find a rented plot that even doesn't end up with long-term tenure, and develop your style of agriculture, figure out where your markets are, figure out what types of work you're really inclined to enjoy, you're only going to be that much more informed in your search for land once, and that much more informed as to what makes sense for you in terms of risk and debt. In the winter, as a hedgerow and snow.
From dream to reality, Willow Cross Farm exemplifies how to borrow an idea and make it into something a little more permanent. In Jeffersonville, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Well, thanks, Keith. I'm joined now by UVM Extension agricultural economist Bob Parsons. Welcome.
Thank you, Judy.
How important is this issue of farm transfers?
Well, it's as we get more and more of our farm assets tied up in the older generation that are getting older, sooner or later this land is going to have to be transferred to another generation or to someone. And of course, if we can make it a planned, orderly transfer, then what ends up happening is what the landowners wanted, not what might be forced upon at the time of death. Mm-hmm.
And I guess back in the day, farm transfers were within the same family.
A lot of transfers were within the farm family. Also, farmland was not as valuable as it is today, so people could always find farms to rent or to even purchase at that time. And in the old days, it wasn't so much a price, it was obtaining credit to buy a farm.
And so how many farmers or landowners in Vermont do you estimate have a transfer plan in place?
I think that it might have probably less than 10% that have one in place. There's a lot of people thinking about it or are partway through the process, but there's a lot of people that haven't got past the thinking stage. They think they know what they would like to do, but they haven't made any plans to make sure that those plans actually is what happens at the time of their death.
When should they start thinking about this? When should a farmer start thinking about what happens to the land after they're done with it?
As soon as they own it.
Really?
And it involves two things. For somebody that's a young farmer today, in their 30s or 40s, they should be thinking also, what happens if they would get killed in a car accident? What would happen to the farm? And if they don't have a plan, the state of Vermont has a plan for them. But that isn't their plan. And so even though the chances of maybe getting killed in a car accident are very slim, it does happen. So if you want to have some plans and you have some ideas of what you want done with your farm, you need to have it in your will, and you need to have your will kept updated.
Now, farm transfers, we figured out, it takes years, even decades, so it's never too early to start. And if you haven't started, is it too late to start?
No, it's never too late. Up until you die, at least you can make some plans so that you're making some plans to have your wishes and the wishes of your family met. And it doesn't have to make everyone happy, but there's a lot of family members involved with it. The farmers, their spouses, whichever one is actually doing the farming, and their children that are involved with the farm, and consideration of those that are not involved with the farm. Because we're talking about a farm business, not just the farm land in many cases.
And so does the type of agricultural business matter? Is it easier to transfer to some other kind of agriculture or keep it the same?
Well, it could be complex, or it could be very complicated. Of course, the more assets that you have to transfer and the more those assets are worth, it does get a lot more complex. But you take let's say a CSA that's located out here, but one of the owners is very key to the business. I mean, that's the person that really sells the shares and really is the business person. If there may not be so many assets, but if that person disappears from that business, can the business even survive? So you have different complexities with that type of business as you would a commodity type business like a large dairy farm.
And so we heard on the tape that the young man was saying open communication is key. You have to have it written down. It has to be spelled out.
Yes, I mean, if you want something to happen, it has to be set up with written plans and with it in place. And it's like this young man had the problem with. How do I acquire farmland? I'm in my early 20s. I haven't married a farm. I can't inherit a farm. I don't have any money, but I've got all these ideas, and I just want a farm. And you have to think a little bit outside the box. And this person, especially with the type of agriculture that he wanted to do nut trees. He wanted to do permaculture, something that takes a long time, maybe directly related to, like, comparable to an apple orchard. You plant an apple tree, but it's going to be 5 years before you get any apples and 10 years before it's economically viable, and this apple tree has a 25-year life. You need to have control of that land that's underneath that apple tree is growing on if you want to be an apple farmer.
You have to be a pretty savvy business person, too, to be able to pull this off.
That is correct, because you're dealing with cash flow. And one of the complexities that, as we saw in this video, is we're planning things that are going to take 4 or 5 years down the road that before they're going to return any cash. So you've got expenses. You have to buy the initial trees just to plant them. You have to make your investment in time, and you have to live off of something during this time period. So in many cases, a lot of our small farmers are part-time farmers where they do have either themselves or a spouse or a partner actually working off the farm to kind of bring some money in for cash living expenses.
Is that one of the hard things for people who are just starting to farm, to look at that huge picture? I mean, don't look 5 years down the line, look 10, 20 years down the line.
You're looking that far down the line, but you also have to worry about whether you're going to be able to live for the next year. And it's a real balancing effect. But in this case, you had somebody that had a plan. He's planting trees, he's planting some nut trees and planting some trees that are going to be timber and multi-use. But these trees may be 20 years before they start to mature, and he starts seeing his dream materialize.
So he's got to have other crops or other ways to make some money.
He has to have some other ways to get the income, and also to get the farmland. You don't want to plant a tree on a rented ground that you don't have control of for the next 20 years. So this is where the innovation come in here, was working with the farm owner and actually worked out a lease-to-own agreement, which eliminated his demand of coming up with an immediate down payment, which he didn't have because he didn't have the cash. He also worked it out with the legal arrangements as well as the tax accountant for both of them, because the IRS gets to play in this, because both people, you have to be reporting the expense the same way as the farmland owner is reporting the income. And so there's a lot of different things put in place here, but whenever both were able to communicate and meet the goals of each one, it worked out.
Bob, thank you so much. The University of Vermont Extension has many resource materials about farm transfer plans, and you can find that information on the website, which is listed on your screen. If you're thinking about a farm transfer plan, or you're a new farmer looking for information about how to make your dream of farming a reality, you can visit uvm.edu/farmtransfer. That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.
Thank you, Judy.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV.